All right. Today is Masti with Satvik Saini, episode 12. I have my man Shoumik on for tonight. He's an awesome individual I met around, I think, 2 years ago. We haven't caught up in a while, but we chat from time to time. He's very involved in some things regarding politics and has good idea and information regarding a lot of these things. And I wanted to bring him on to discuss a lot of things such as virtue signaling, possibility of police reform, and a lot of other things going on in the world today. So, without further ado, he's a senior, he's a rising senior at UT Austin, and currently he's working at Capital One. So we'll have him join. Ooh, let me just go live with him.
Hey
Shoumik,
man,
hey,
can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we're good. How are you, dude?
I'm awesome. Long time no talk.
It's been a hot minute.
I like the beard though.
Actually, yeah, I like yours, dude. I like what you did with it. It's spicy.
How are things with you?
Good. They've been well, as good as they can be. I've been having a okay summer. Can't complain. I still have my internship. I can't say the same for a lot of my friends. So I'm just really grateful that I have something worthwhile to do this summer.
No, I hear you. I hear you. Feeling grateful. And as far as like, I know you're a senior, but what are you studying? I can't recall.
I'm studying liberal arts and finance. I'm doing this weird interdisciplinary program at UT called Plan 2 Honors. And that's a major in itself. Double majoring with finance.
Oh, dope. So you're doing more finance type of work for your internship?
Well, it's actually in financial services, but my work really has nothing to do with finance. It's to do with process management.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Good for you. How's the remote life? Do you like it? And what
I
office?
mean, it's not bad. It's manageable. It's definitely not the in-person experience, but I'm making do with what I have. I can't complain. Like I said, I have no reason to complain. I'm in a really privileged situation.
I hear you. I hear you. All right, dude, let's get right into it. You have an affinity towards politics, a lot of things going on in our nation. I know you have some experience where you've been involved in some organizations that get you close to some of those things. So talk a little bit about your experiences with politics in this country.
So the thing to know about me is that I moved to America 5 years ago. So it's not been that long. I grew up around the world, born in Mumbai, moved to Singapore, moved to England, and then moved here 5 years ago. And I moved here right when the Republican presidential primaries were going on, and I thought, gosh, what a shit show. And I wanted to get involved. American politics seemed really cool. Everybody in the world cares about it. So I started canvassing, well, phone banking for Hillary Clinton in 2016. I started there, worked on a whole bunch of other congressional campaigns, one in my own home district. Um, Ended up getting more involved in politics and student government politics at UT Austin as well, and Texas politics as a whole. Um, and yeah, last summer I did an internship with the Hindu American Foundation in DC, which was super cool. I got to spend a whole summer there in DC doing advocacy work, meeting with senators and congressmen, and pushing the right legislation for Hindu Americans.
Damn, that's awesome. I mean, I would see all these Instagrams and I was like, whoa, you're kind of like up with
That's the power
senators.
of that's the power of Instagram, man. It gives you a really distorted view of what life is. It's just the snapshots of the highlights.
That's interesting. What's during that work, or like even being in the White House around some of these senators? What was some of the things that stood out to you? Someone like you, someone like myself, who hasn't really as involved, or like on the floor level per se, like someone like me might miss something we don't. Um,
Um, I think most people don't realize that the people who run our largest institutions, most complicated organizations, the people we trust, the people we look up to, the people we venerate, they're all idiots. Like I'm not in like a derogatory way. They're just people. They're not gods. They're not. people with some sort of secret knowledge. They're just people trying to do the best they can. And you realize that very quickly. You look at the way a congressman runs an office, it's sometimes it's really disorganized, and you can tell like this guy's probably not going to get that much done. Um, so there's dysfunction at every level of government, every level of politics. And I kind of became a little cynical of it all, but that's a different story.
No, no, let's go down that path. Why?
Well, not cynical. I still obviously trust the political process. I still think people need to be civically engaged. Um, but I saw firsthand the kind of things you have to do to be in politics. Um, the kind of it's it's not it's not all House of Cards. Like it's really not. It's not like I have like a super in-depth insight, but from what I have seen, it's not somewhere I want to be currently in my life. I want to do something. I want to get into the private industry. I want to do something with businesses. Politics is not necessarily for me right now. That was what my realization was, and part of the reason was because it's pretty toxic and it's just too much.
So interesting that you bring up House of Cards. So let's say a scale of 1 to 10. How similar is it to House of Cards?
Bro, I'm not the right person to answer that. There's people who have been way more involved who can probably give you like the exact right answer. But from what I have seen, I would say like a five.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So your experience there with a lot of those types of things has strayed you away from politics for the time being.
Say that again?
So your experiences, the previous experiences being in the senators, meeting some of those people, has swayed you away from politics, more into the private
Well,
sector.
saved me away from politics for now. It's not that I don't continue to be civically engaged and try to advocate
Yeah.
for the right causes, whatever I see fit. It's just that I'm not the one who's going to be walking down the halls of Congress, asking senators to support a piece of legislation. I don't think that's what my calling is right now.
No, I feel you. Interesting. So I know, and then you mentioned a little bit about social media, how about accentuating your lifestyle and the image we have. So how do you think social media is affecting public discourse and politics in today's day and age? Especially now, like
Well, say that last part, you cut off a bit.
especially like in a moment like this.
Oh yeah, I think it obviously plays a huge role. I think you'd have to be blind to not realize how big of a role that social media plays in our political discourse today. Especially with the whole resurgence of social justice activism. Um, Social media is a huge tool. It's a huge tool for good. It's a tool for bad as well. And it's a tool that I think a lot of people use to feel good about themselves. That hey, I shared something on social media. Hey, I signed a petition. That's good. Um, it's a step in the right direction, yeah, but I think it gives us a false sense of complacency. But from what I've seen in this current wave of social media, of social justice, people have been really emphasizing action over performative things, right? They've been really emphasizing, hey, donate to this organization. Hey, sign this. What do you call it? So, petition. Yeah, sign this petition. Um, Very actionable items that you can do. Send this email. So I think that's been a step in the right direction.
I hear you. So tell me a little bit about, like, I have some takes on this too regarding virtue signaling and a lot of what goes on regarding you saying complacency and people doing it to make themselves feel good. So what are some more thoughts? Dive a little further into that whole concept of virtue signaling today.
Well, it's not even just that it makes you feel better. It kind of a lot of times I feel it stems from a place of insecurity that you yourself are not somebody that's living up to these anti-racist standards that people have been talking about, right? So you feel the urge to declare on social media that, hey, I'm actually good. I'm actually on the right side of history here. I'm actually uh, a good person. And you might very well be. It's just that we need to understand that that's the bare minimum. Like that's very little. That there's a lot more that you can do. That's a lot more that you should do. You need to be having these difficult conversations with people in your life. You should be re-examining yourself. You should be educating yourself. You should be, try to understand the world around you in a more holistic manner. Um, so yeah, I think social media kind of it encourages people to do that, but often is not very effective.
No, I hear what you're saying, and especially with the signaling part. I mean, as humans, we signal in a lot of the things we do, right? Like status appears to us can be we signal the way our houses look, or cars and clothes and whatnot. So I think this is an important part of what's become like this virtual signaling, where people want themselves to convert just for them, like you're saying, kind of against other. Maybe they might not. That's what I'm saying. It's hard to determine what's really authentic. Like, how do you know someone's being just posting something
Wait,
that makes them?
you're cutting off there. Could you say that last part again?
So, like, how do you know someone's actually being authentic in the things they're posting
You
and
don't.
doing?
You don't. And I honestly, it doesn't matter. Like at the end of the day, whether or not someone's being authentic or inauthentic, like how much does that really matter? Like that's my question. Like it's obviously dumb if they're being inauthentic, but how much does it really matter?
Well, I think I see what you're saying, but I think it matters more. Let's like give you an example. A certain type of school of thought on social media is more might be more acceptable for whatever reason, right? Let's say human rights reason, or like to be virtuous, and that assembles into a mob on social media, and then that turns to like warfare with another side or another individual. So this multitude of mobs happening on social media, that's where it gets problematic. A lot of people don't can hide behind a screen. That's what I think.
No, I agree. Like the polarization of American society politically is not a new phenomenon. It's just been accentuated by the COVID crisis,
Mm-hmm.
by the social justice movements of our time. Um, yeah, I don't like mob mentality. I think everyone should be a free thinker. Everyone should think for themselves. Everybody should critically examine the information that they're given rather than picking sides and sticking with positions no matter what. But I feel like it's so easy. It's really easy to pick sides. It's really easy to say this is who I identify with. If you go against me, it's you're offending all of us.
Interesting. What do you mean by the last part? You think it's easy to stand out when?
No, I'm saying it's really easy to pick sides. I think it's the
Oh,
binary that's been created that you have to pick sides, that you have to be on the side of the oppressor or the side of the oppressed. You can't necessarily be a critical thinker by yourself.
that's the tough part. Where I think like whole that's where the virtue signaling goes into like another type of problem per se. Is just if you fully, I think, if you fully or condone or like are fully aligned with one specific side for all of them, I don't think you're actually like thinking critically in a way. Because I see a lot
Yeah.
of like whole yelling per se. Like, there's no way if you thought things through that every single thing aligns with your principles. Like it's so binary, right? There's no place for nuance in a way.
Yeah, and I think there might be people on either side who have really thought about this critically, who are very well versed in their studies, and after a whole lot of examination, they pick a side or the other. But I think there are more people who pick one side or the other because their friends are on that side, or they see an Instagram post with colorful letters.
Yeah, that right there.
Yeah, um, like how our generation, especially the Indian Americans, we complain about how our parents get their news from WhatsApp. Uh, we complain
Yeah,
so much about how they get fake news from WhatsApp and they don't verify it, they don't look into it, they just propagate it um, without thinking twice about it. That's us with
yeah.
Instagram, man. Like we find an Instagram slide with pretty pictures and a pretty slogan, and we're like, "Well, I'm gonna share the shit out of this." Like, I agree with it. I don't care how radical. Um, and often, I honestly don't think we always even agree with everything that's being said. It's just that mentality is that I have to show people that I'm on the right side of this, because I've talked to so many people who have posted things like that, and I've DM'd them like, "Hey, are you sure you really mean this? Like, do you agree with everything that's being said here?" They're like, "Oh, wait, I read it. I didn't read it right. Never mind. I actually don't agree with that. And they sometimes they take it down. I'm like, oh, cool.
No, that's fascinating that you say that. It's actually a really good point regarding where we stand or where we could be, and then regarding another thought or more circulation. So, as far as like mob mentalities go, like how do you think we figured out a way to deal with a mob on social media per se? I know mobs have existed throughout the course of history, but more so on social media. Like how do we deal with them? Like because someone could literally take all the context out, strip it of something, and present a certain type of narrative, right? And there's a
Yeah.
mob. How do we how do you think we deal with that as
I don't
people?
know, dude. I honestly don't know the answer. Like for me, there's mobs on both sides of the social media political spectrum. There's right wing mobs and left wing mobs. I personally don't give a shit if I'm being attacked by a right wing mob because they're crazy people. I know for a fact that they're extremist. I am most concerned with the left wing mob because they're my friends, right? They're people I respect. They're people I interact with on a day-to-day basis. I don't want to be canceled. No one wants to be canceled, right? And just the idea of facing eternal social damnation for something that might be taken out of context is pretty scary. And I don't think anybody wants to live under the fear that what they say is being policed by this by a mob of social justice warriors.
No, dude, I hear you. That's very interesting. So, would you say you're almost more scared of bringing some things up with your friends than like some random right wing mob guy on the
Um,
internet?
well, what's like there's I see no point in engaging with right wing mobs, right? Like there are literal people who believe in white supremacy. I think these are the idiots that are considered part of the right wing mob, right? There are people who don't believe the COVID-19 crisis is real. They don't believe in wearing masks. These are the people that I don't really have a direct interaction with. Um, I live in Texas, but I don't know too many people like that in person. I know they exist, obviously, but a lot of my interaction is with friends who are on the other side of the spectrum. One question somebody's asking is, what is the left wing mob? I wish there was a definite answer to that, but I think what it is people who believe um, heavily in socialist ideals, people who believe in radical change in government, people who believe in uh, a far bigger role of the government in our day-to-day lives. I think that roughly constitutes the left-wing mob. Also, people
Maybe
who,
Karl
hmm?
Marx ideas, maybe Marxism ideas there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, socialism is definitely a variant of uh, Marxist ideas, but it's not communism. Um, so wait, what was the question? I went off on a
Like, how would
tangent
you?
there, man.
No, I can actually reword the question since what you have answered. Like, regarding how do you go about challenging your views, especially with like when it comes to right wing versus left wing, both sides. How do you try to get a total encompassing picture?
Um, so what we said earlier about having these tribes and having these groups that we identify with, it's often really important to pick yourself out and think to yourself, well, what is the truth? What is the reality? What is it that is real? If I hadn't been fed the information that I have from my news sources, what conclusion would I have arrived at otherwise? What would my worldview have been if I was in someone else's shoes? I think doing that has allowed me to gain a perspective from someone else's point of view.
Interesting. And then covering up on the question, like with the left wing mobs, have you had any interactions? Some areas where maybe something that was misconstrued and you had to really backtrack and clear things up?
Well, it's nothing. It's not been anything too serious. For the most part, I'm pretty careful about what I say on the internet. On Twitter, I'm a little more lax, but I'm still pretty careful. I um, think twice before posting anything. I
Yeah.
make sure whatever I'm posting is absolutely true. I'll give you an example. So there was a video that got really viral of Mike Pence after he was done distributing these boxes of PPE to this hospital, and he said to somebody that, can we do a photo op just for the cameras, like picking up an empty box, right, just for the cameras, and like the media ran with it, right? All these prominent people retweeting it and be like, hey, this Mike Pence is fake, just like his administration, stuff like that, right? Really prominent personalities. I retweeted something like that. And then 5 tweets later, I realized that they had taken it out of context and Mike Pence had actually been joking. He was just, shooting the shit with his buddy or whatever. So I undid that retweet because I don't like to propagate things that are blatantly false.
Yeah,
And it's really easy to do that, um, which often attracts attention from both sides of the extreme spectrums.
true. I hear you. A lot of things that when one side's that's where like a lot of the outrage comes from, and I think that's kind of like if there's someone I'm sure you've been involved or talked to people on Instagram or social media in general where like there's a lot of yelling and it's just surface level outrage level where you like even with things going on in India per se or some of the things that come out here, like you see it first, think about it, and then go with the mob and it's outrage, outrage, outrage. And there's been people that I've interacted with. It's been like 1 or 2 hours where I've actually talked things through with them, but like no amends because I know like then now I know like some people just won't budge. They're still at that outrage level, which I think is like kind of crazy to me, but to one's own. So that those are the people like I try not to have a public discourse with in a way. But I know it's a more nuanced people who are actually willing to understand or listen to any side.
Yeah, I hear you. It's hard to have difficult conversations entirely online. It's things can get misinterpreted. It's a lot of work, a lot of typing. It's just sometimes not worth it. But I understand where the outrage sometimes comes from. Like there are some issues that I feel really strongly about, and I often can't engage. And I've noticed this about myself that I can't engage in a productive conversation about a topic because I feel so strongly about it. And that's a flaw. Like I realize that about myself. I try to work on it. I'm not always successful. But that issue can be anything else for somebody else, right? So I'm trying to out here trying to have a calm conversation about, say, I don't know, pick a controversial issue, right? I'm trying to have a calm conversation about it. Somebody who feels really strongly about it may not be able to do so. And I think that's a bad thing for everybody, for me, for them. If you can't um, rationally discuss some ideas, I think you're losing a lot.
I hear you, especially when things become a lot. There's a lot of emotional arguments, right? And there's can be emotional attachment, family background, history with any sort
Yeah,
of issue, and that's
exactly, exactly.
it's hard to think clearly. And I mean, I'm guilty of it too, just as anyone else might be. It makes it hard.
Yeah,
There's a lot of yelling in that area, not a lot of
yeah,
listening.
really does. Yeah.
So, show me, let's get a little bit more into like some of the more political stuff. Something going on in Black Lives Day, like police. I know
Wait,
there's been
say that
defunded.
again. Okay,
So
go on.
there's
Yeah,
been. Can you hear me now?
yeah.
So there's been things regarding a lot of posts I see regarding defund the police and things like that. So what are some of your thoughts on that? Where do you think we need for police reform in this country?
I'm not an expert on police reform. I don't know as much about the criminal justice system as I would like to know. I've
Yeah,
started looking into it a bit more given the state of our current discourse. But there's definitely a lot more that I don't know than what I do know. But personally, right now, I agree with people who are trying to call for defunding the police. But defunding the police means very different things for very different people. Um,
yeah,
the most common interpretation of it is you reallocate funds for the police, from you take it from the police department budgets and give them to social service workers who are kind of filling the needs that policemen often uh, fill needlessly. That makes sense conceptually to me, right? That idea makes sense to me. Um, but I don't know if that's verifiable. I don't know how the numbers work. I don't know what the current situation is. I personally don't think I have a strong enough grasp on the state of current affairs in America and the criminal justice system beyond the stuff that I've seen on Instagram to be able to say, yeah, this is the right answer. Because there's people that I don't know if you saw recently headlines that crime in New York City shot up like crazy after funds were reallocated from the police. You don't want that. You don't want crime to shoot up, and oftentimes it's communities, minority communities, that get affected most by this crime. Um, so I don't know what the right answer is, man. I I've seen a lot of Instagram posts about it. I've had some conversations about it, but I'm not well informed to say this is the right answer.
No, I hear you. I mean, neither am I. That's the whole point of this, right? We're just having a conversation. Is off, not recommending anything, but from what I hear, like, it seems like people like defund the police almost means abolish it in a way. And to me, like, this is just me thinking things, right? Like, it almost seems counterintuitive to defund it in a way. If anything, I think there's a fun.
You said it's counterintuitive to defund it.
Well, I'm just thinking, like, I think it's a training and better personnel, better suited for those roles, which equips to more funding and training in those areas. I definitely understand the argument for like you don't need to call a police officer for a lot of cases, and I don't know how you dodge that problem, but in this area, like defunding it, I don't know. Like I almost like you just mentioned, like New York City. I did hear things about that about crime being shot up. It just almost creates a power vacuum of power with crime. So that's a very weird relationship, and I don't know how you transform or even reform. No doubt police needs to be reformed in this country and there needs to be some substantial steps being taken. But I don't think defunding it, personally, with what I know, is might be the right place to go.
Yeah, and that's fair, but from the argument against that is that we have tried so hard to fix the police system. We've had all these training programs, we've had all this anti-bias training. Um, we've expended so many resources in fixing the police, that is it even worth trying anymore? That's the argument that I'm hearing from the left, right? Um, I don't know how much credence that argument has. I definitely think that the police has an appropriate role to play in society, and I definitely I think abolishing the police altogether, which is what I've heard from a lot of my friends. They are for the not even just abolishment of police in America, the universal abolishment of police. I swear that is
That's
something I saw on Instagram. It blew my mind. And this was related to a post about India. It was talking about how if you can't be a good Indian American if you support Black Lives Movement, but you're not Black Lives Matter, but you're against the rights of Muslims and minorities in India, um, which I thought was completely ridiculous. Like you're comparing, they were in essence comparing the minorities in India with the minorities in America, which is a very, very different story. Um, and they were calling for some really radical changes that you can't be for the police, you can't support police in India if you are a part of Black Lives Matter. Like, really?
yeah. That's one of the
Um,
struggles. Like they're just trying to make correlations out of thin air.
Yeah, and that's the stuff that goes viral on Instagram, and that's the stuff I see on my friends' Instagram stories, and I'm just like, God damn, really? Like, not again.
No, I hear you, dude. So the week before last week I had my baby 6-year-old cousin on the podcast. The week before that, one of my he talked about some issues where like the Aunt Jemima, like the syrup bottle thing, and some of the things like he as a black man really doesn't give a shit about in this are being propagated as huge when there's much other underlying issues, like other people taking the narrative from their people in a way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had conversations about this with friends as well. Like people have DM'd me on Instagram like, hey, thanks for talking about this because people are using Black Lives Matter as a springboard for their own political agendas, or using it as a time to virtue signal and say, hey, look what I did. I fixed stuff, right? Like both of it is just kind of dumb to me. There are very concrete, tangible things that you can do to fix inequality in the United States. But, you know, calling for the universal abolition of the police is just not one of them.
Well, were you following the Chaz area in Seattle at all?
Yeah, yeah, I kind of saw what was happening there. I heard that a bunch of people got killed in Chaz and they had to like shut it down. What?
Like shit went down when we were trying to do this utopia type of environment, right? And like they there and like people were murdered, people were looted and killed, and it,
Yeah.
I don't know. It was interesting to see.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about it, man. It's a weird situation. I from the offset I was a bit irked by it. I didn't see the point of, asserting your dominance in a autonomous zone. The knowledge that I have about it is from the Daily podcast by New York Times. I don't know if you listen to the Daily, but it's a pretty solid podcast. I'm sure it's like biased to a certain extent, but if you don't listen to the Daily, I highly recommend that you do because it kind of gives you a deep dive into a particular issue. Um, and one of the things that the Daily podcast mentioned was that Chaz, it's become sort of a like a utopia for white people. Like black people, they don't really care um, about what they're doing in Chaz. They don't care that you're forming a socialist utopia. Black people want police reform. They want to feel safe. They don't want violence in their communities, right? They they care about education. They care about all these different things. And there's white socialist liberals who are saying, no, screw you. We're gonna create a socialist utopia in the middle of Seattle. So it's not really helping their cause,
Yeah.
and a lot of them recognize that.
Well, that was interesting. Like all the things they stood for ended up seeping into their community as well. So that's where I just thought, like, I don't know, it seemed a lot very hypocritical in a lot of
Yeah,
aspects.
yeah, open borders. But the first thing they did was like block off their zone, right?
But they had like patrol guards set up, which was
Oh
interesting.
yeah, patrol guards with guns. Yeah,
That was fascinating. And then like I think a lot of protesters there, so they were organizing some things and they would call cops to protect them, which I thought was very telling.
really.
Yeah, some things like that. That was just fascinating to me. To see what would like someone's mindset, what would it take them for them to take that drastic leap? It's almost like anything happens, it's just like all or nothing. Like
What
after
do you What do you mean?
so
Like,
like today, like if any, say something happens within an organization, it's just like, oh fuck that organization, let's tear it down. There's no real like middle ground. Like Chaz would be one of those scenarios, right? Oh,
well, see, Satvik, I think what we're seeing right now is the buildup of years and years of activism. It's all coming to a head at this moment in time. Chaz and Antifa, these are, well, Chaz is new, but Antifa and left-wing socialists, that is not a new phenomenon. That has been happening. These are groups that have been active for years now. This moment in our history is just the perfect storm. It's
uh,
the perfect time for a lot of groups to get together, for um, a lot of activists to get together and demand real change, no matter how radical it may be.
true. That's a good point. Almost like a perfect storm brewing, and people opportunists almost popping any
Yeah,
chance.
and it's also the fact that we've been stuck at home for months now. People are
Yeah,
angry, people are getting desperate. You hear stories about people bursting firecrackers in New York City and people dying because of these firecrackers. Like, things are getting out of hand. Like, people want to do stuff, and the protests and the social movements were a huge, enormous outlet.
true. In a way, it's like good and it allows us to really focus in and to do a deep dive into some of the issues and even have some of these conversations that we're having. But at the same time, like you're saying, people don't have a lot going on, so a lot of outreach, and that's often projected in various forms and outlets, which is
Yeah,
dangerous and could be how you do it, right?
yeah,
There's a lot up in the air. But
yeah. We're definitely living through
anyways,
some historic times. Yeah, what were you saying?
so like changing the topic a little bit. So regarding some of the things that have been coming up, a lot of things I see within even like the Indian community has been the model minority myth. Did you have any thoughts on that? What that means to you, and how do you perceive it?
Yeah, so from Actually, I found the Instagram posts from people about model minority myth to be actually pretty helpful. And I read more about it, and I understand where they're coming from. That the model minority myth is a construct that was used to pit one minority group against another. Um, and I definitely don't like the term model minority myth because it's been bestowed upon us by the white majority in America, right? They're pointing at us and saying, "Hey, you look at you Indians, you're great. Why? I wish everybody were that way." That's obviously dumb, right? But then there's people, Indian Americans, who are looking at the model minority myth and saying, "This is an oppressive term. This is something that actively oppresses Black people." Which I'm not so sure about. I definitely think there are issues with the model minority myth. I don't like the term in itself, but we have to ask ourselves, where did it come from? You know, why were Indians held as the standard? Um, well, for one, only the smartest Indians immigrated here. Therefore, they were more focused on their jobs and getting their kids educated. But a big part of it was our ethos, right? Our ethos of hard work, an emphasis on education, and some really strong cultural values that have ensured the success of um, Indian Americans and Chinese Americans. Indian Americans being the highest uh, the, the ethnicity with the highest median income in America.
I saw that.
Um, yeah, so I see the issues with the model minority myth, um, but it's not something to throw away. In fact, I think um, the the reason we are given given this title of model minority, I think the underlying reasons are actually uh, worthwhile to look at.
No, that's a good point. You bring up a really good point about ethos and culture there because the way it's been weaponized, I mean, we have to give it up to the African American community for paving a lot of the ways for a lot of minorities in this nation, no doubt. And a lot
No
of
doubt.
into this country, probably in a higher area. Not all, can't speak for everyone, right? You can't generalize or speak for all minorities, Asian minorities coming into this country. But that's the thing where, like, some people, we joke about it. Like, all of us Indians or Asians are very hard workers or, like, want to be doctors, engineers, or this presence or value of education. Like, that's where, like, culture plays a little bit of role, too, I think. And that's often gets misrepresented. Like, oh, you're
Yeah,
privileged. Oh, you're a privileged Indian American. Like, I mean, that's just the way it's weaponized is not what I agree with. But definitely, you're right though. It did open my eyes about something that you didn't really think about initially.
yeah. Like my whole issue is that this is being framed from this viewpoint of the white majority in America, right? That here's a minority, here's another minority. Why can't you be like the other? That's problematic to me. That it kind of creates a sense of complacency for the Indians, and it gives us our worth from the viewpoint of the white people, like the majority, that, oh, look how great we are. The white people said so. That's dumb. That's really wrong to me. I was gonna say something about model minority. Oh yeah, cultural expectations, right? So I grew up around the world. I did my ninth and 10th grade in England. I went to this private boys' school, and all my life I've been terrible at math, right? I've just been like pretty bad. Not I don't even think I've been bad. It's just that I've been bad for an Indian, right? Like my
It,
expectation for people's expectation for what I should be is like up there. I've been down here. Um, and people always told me back in England in ninth and 10th grade, Shoumik, like, aren't you supposed to be like really smart in math? And I had moved from Singapore as well, which is one of the smartest countries in the world. They were like, you got a Singaporean education, like what's happening with you? It was disheartening, right? I was like, why am I not good enough? But that kind of pushed me to be better. I was like, being good at math is not a bad thing. It's something that will actually help me in life. And if societal pressure if that's what's going to take me to be good at math, then so be it, because it's going to help me eventually in life. Um, so I didn't shrug it off as a cultural expectation, but rather something, rather a challenge that I could live up to.
no, I hear what you're saying, especially if the way it's an expectation, right? Like it could be hard on a lot of kids. Like not everyone. the same capacity or things like that. And yeah, generally, even in college admissions and whatnot, like Asian Americans have a certain higher standard per se of getting into because we're treated with the pool of our community, Asians as a whole. That can be tough at times where if you're abnormal in terms of studies or whatnot, if you're not like the Raj, the computer guy, IT support,
Yeah,
like if you're
yeah,
not,
but
if you don't, it's difficult. But I see what you're saying. The
yeah,
motivator and
I think Indian Americans in our generation have been pretty good about pursuing, from my understanding at least, have been, really actively pursuing the things that they want. And I think that's really good because that's the next step in our, uh, in this next step in the evolution of Indian Americans in the country, right? We're not going to be just engineers and data scientists. We're going to be artists and musicians and composers and everything. And I think that's the right way forward. So the expectancy that you should be good at math, expectancy that you should be good at math, it shouldn't be something that holds you back, but rather drives you to be good at it.
no, I hear you. And like for people listening, like this, the cultural expectation of us picking safer engineers, doctor, a lot of this comes from like generations of being taught and like bred like education. You need to do this stuff. Securities. It's just parents caring and providing that. I hear you, man. A lot of people. I don't know. Like, have you heard a lot of the TikTok like Tesher? A lot of the musicians coming out with a lot of bangers, like Indian Americans, like rappers and whatnot. Other podcasts being started, like this, for example, and other things. It's like it's great. It's great to see more
Yeah, I
voices, and like
definitely
that's
agree.
where the BIPOC needs to step up in a lot of these areas where we have many different.
I don't even know BIPOC was a thing until like this whole storm started. Like I didn't know about that term, dude.
Dude, same. I honestly,
I had to look it up. Okay, initially I shit you not, I thought it meant bisexual people of color. Like I had to look up what BIPOC meant, dude.
I don't blame you. There's a lot of things that came up during this time that I had no idea what they meant. So I really had to do some research.
Yeah, yeah.
And so another question here, Shoumik. As far as like, you're not as smart for an Indian per se. Like getting comments like that. Did that ever like would you treat those as microaggressions? And if so, like this is also microaggressions. I never knew anything till like a week ago, to be honest. What they even consider, what they were, and like how did that affect people. But did that ever bother you? Does that bother you? How so? And why?
Yeah, so I have a really good story with microaggressions. First of all, I think, and I don't mean to be insensitive here, but it's simply the fact that the privilege of being offended um, is a privilege. It's not something people outside of America or outside the Western world have can think about, you know. So I think the fact that we're at the point in society in America where we can start critically examining the way we interact with each other, we can examine our own internal biases. That's a good thing. Um, but we got to put it into context. Um, so like I mentioned, I did my ninth and 10th grade in England, right? I had moved from India to Singapore to England, and throughout this journey, I had carried with me my Indian accent. It was a very strong Indian accent. So when I moved to England, I was put in this posh private boys' school, um, and I don't know what the hell I was doing, right? I was totally out of place. It was It was just a horrifying few days, like first few days there. And so I became like an instant magnet of attraction for everybody because I had an exotic Indian accent, right? So the biggest question I would get is, where are you from? Like, what's your background? What are you doing here? Like, what's your story, right? Um, and I got that question so many times. Where are you from, and how did you learn English? Like, those are the questions I got. I didn't realize back then that I was supposed to be offended by these questions. Right now I see Instagram posts about what constitutes a microaggression, and I see those exact words like, "Where are you from? How did you learn English?" These are now considered microaggressions. Back then, I didn't know it was a microaggression, and I had to deal with it. I used that question as an opportunity to tell people my story. That hey, I moved around so much. This is where I'm from. Here's where my family is from. And it allowed me to build better friendships. It allowed me to connect with people in ways that I wouldn't have otherwise. Um, and so what could have been a microaggression to me, I turned it into something meaningful. Um, and I thought that was a pretty good way of handling it. Um, I explained to people that if you're a middle class kid in Mumbai, like I was, you probably grew up learning English. English is not something that's foreign to you. You grew up learning English. People didn't know that. People were surprised that I could speak English when I moved to England. Um, and so it was a chance to educate them. It wasn't a chance to be all dignified and mighty and say, how the hell dare you say that? Because number one, I didn't have the social standing to do such a thing, right? I would be like even more of an outcast if I was offended and walked away. So the right thing to do in that scenario for me was to turn it into a worthwhile, meaningful conversation. Um,
Yeah, dude. I mean, I definitely hear you there. It's microaggressions. I honestly, like not being insensitive or anything. I don't. None of that stuff kind of offends me in a weird way, because, like you said, like growing up in a different country, a different environment, you really see a lot of different sides of this stuff. Like, there's a lot of intention behind these things. If someone asks me where you're from, like, yeah, I could get all worked up, like, yo, why? I'm still American too. Like, just because I'm brown doesn't mean not American. I mean, I don't take offense to that. I just feel like you're saying, it's just it comes from ignorance and its lack of impure. I really don't give a shit about microaggressions, but I can see how it impacts people in a certain type of way, depending on
yeah,
what the aggression.
yeah, a lot of the microaggressions that I've read about that are apparently common, they're like, "Oh, you're really pretty for an Asian girl." Like I see that and I'm like, yeah, that's definitely a horrendous thing to say to anybody, right? Like you can't say that. But the issue isn't the fact that they said it. The issue is the fact that they have this internal racial bias, right? That whoever it is, they grew up thinking that Asian women can't be pretty or Asian men can be attractive. That's the internal racial bias. I think that's what needs to be addressed. The microaggression is merely the symptom of backward thinking, you know?
No, I hear you, and I think media plays a huge role now. Like think about it, any movie ever. What is the Indian or Asian guy in that movie or show ever? The
What
IT
is the
guy,
what?
like
Oh yeah.
any movie or TV show ever. The Asian or Indians always like the IT loser who's trying to get with the hottest girl or whatnot. And this is why Never Have Ever, I don't know if you've seen that show, changed it when Prashant was like that hot Indian who came in the arranged marriage life, right? Like it was like a big moment for.
I need to see that show. I haven't seen it yet.
You haven't seen it? Oh, never mind. And so like,
I've seen the Prashant memes though, so
okay,
I'm kind of familiar. Yeah.
what I'm talking.
Yeah.
That was a big moment for us, the way we're portrayed, and I think that plays a big role in how other people or other communities might perceive us. And I don't blame other people necessarily. It's just about a matter of education. Like you
Yeah,
can't
I agree.
go around all prejudiced, and that doesn't solve anything. That makes the matter worse, if anything.
Right, right. But then again, I take issue with the idea that you have to draw your self-worth based on the representation you have in Hollywood or anywhere else for that matter. That
Yeah.
I see how it helps people who don't have the self-confidence to pursue a career in music to have an Indian musician making it big. I see how it helps you, right? Um, but I also don't think that you should be drawing your worth from whether or not you have the same skin color as people on a stage, you know? That's my only qualm with it.
No, no, no. I definitely don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say like why another people in the community, like a white person or someone else from majority, might think, oh, you're hot for an Asian, because the way
Yeah,
a lot of things they see, especially
right, right, right.
with their communities. That's the thing I was trying to say. But no
Oh
way.
yeah.
Don't draw your don't draw your fucking self worth from Hollywood or shit like that, because that will beat you and yourself.
That will beat you, man. Like people can be portrayed all kinds of ways, and uh, they're like there was another thing. So with all this whole social justice happening, um, at UT Austin, there have been a lot of demands by the student body to implement some really big changes, right? There have been demands from Black student organizations and countless others to hire more Black faculty,
Hmm.
to focus on recruiting more Black faculty. I'm all for that. Like, I think you should have more Black professors, Black teachers, absolutely. Um, but the reason they were saying is that if you don't have more Black faculty, um, you're not gonna not gonna find role models. You're not gonna find the right mentors. You're not gonna find the right people to support you, which implies that only Black people can support Black people. Um, I don't think that's true at all. I think everybody should be able to support everybody, right? Um, I've thought about the professors that I've had in my life. Very few of them, I think one or two of them have been Indian. But I've connected with professors on the content matter, the subject matter. I've been drawn by their intellect and their professional passions. Um, that's a whole rabbit hole. Honestly, that I've thought about it a lot. I don't know where I stand on the issue, but it's a very interesting topic.
No, I hear you. Like flipping that around, but which I think that comes from like the initial sense of comfortableness or maybe in visualization that someone of your type. And I think, yeah, maybe it has some of that identity stuff, your race, a lot of genders, things like that, whether we like it or not, do become politicized. So, like, growing up and seeing that, would you feel more comfortable if it was an Indian professor, like having a brown professor per se, or Desi or Indian professor, being more comfortable from the get go? Does that ever cross your mind? I hear you, completely hear you about like the intellect and connecting on those things, but sometimes you kind of get that, oh man, there's another person like me kind of deal.
Yeah. I definitely see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if there's an Indian professor, I'm gonna instantly be a little more comfortable, right? Because we have a good baseline of cultural expectations, and I can well assume to a reasonable extent that we share some cultural values. We grow with certain traditions, especially if they're Hindu. Um, so it makes me feel comfortable, right? But my parents came to America, and that was very uncomfortable. Like I did, the expectation was that I'm going to be put into uncomfortable situations, where I'm not going to be surrounded by the people that look like me, and I'm going to have to make the most of it. So that's always been my frame of mind, that I'm going to have to be comfortable and being uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. No, I hear you. Uncomfortableness like that is important for growth, especially. And I know we're like humans are like tribal in nature. We look for our kin and we look for people like us. That's why we congregate in groups and whatever cliques or whatnot. But that's definitely true. Like growing up here, not finding that as often, and that is a whole different rabbit hole though, like about the identity crisis and not
Yeah,
finding people.
and I don't know if I'm the best person to speak about it because I didn't grow up here. I only moved here my junior year of high school. So I feel like the Indian American experience is not something I've experienced in whole, but in part.
Interesting, but I guess you also have a myriad of experiences then. Did you ever live in India at all, or just all over
Yeah,
but India?
I lived in India. I lived in Mumbai for 8 years, and then Singapore for 6 years.
Oh, damn! So you really
Yeah.
are,
I mean, it wasn't travel, dude. It was just like packing up your bags and moving.
which is hard in itself. Like I did when I was younger. I've moved a couple of times. So like I grew up in India till I was 9 or 10, and then moved to Chicago, and then Boston, and then here in Colorado.
Yeah,
But
it's
moving,
not easy.
yeah, you almost get used to it. But thinking back, there's people who actually stayed in the same place for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah. And the thing about America was that when I moved to America, I instantly knew that this was a place I could call home because everybody's an immigrant, right? In Singapore or in England, I was always the other guy. I was somebody who came from the outside, right? Because in England, there's a very specific definition of what is English. In Singapore, there's also a very specific definition of what is Singaporean. In America, you're all immigrants.
So did
Like
you struggle with
what
that in
in what? Where?
England and Singapore? Like what describe describe a little bit more what it means to be English.
Yeah, being English in my mind, right, for the longest time, it was being white and preppy, right? That's obviously a very crude way of putting it. But in
Yeah.
my mind, that's what being English meant. And I never ever felt like I was well integrated into the English society. And I don't think I would ever feel that way because I wasn't born there. I only just moved there. And I had this whole issue with my accent. I had an Indian accent. That is like immediate, boom, you're out. You can't be English. So after I spent 2 years in England, right? After the first year, I made up my mind. I said I'm gonna adopt a British accent, and I did. I started speaking in a British accent, and it stuck with me until my junior year, until the end of my junior year of high school in America. Um, but it was like a very mindful decision that if I want to fit in, I'm gonna have to get a British accent. In America, it came natural. Like American accents are like way easier to adopt. It just came naturally, but I didn't care about fitting in here, you know? Everybody's got their own thing.
Damn, that's interesting. You felt like you had to conform to have your status within people there in England.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Like ninth grade was rough. Like I got bullied for having an Indian accent. It was horrendous. So I had to like do something.
Damn. So did you almost like have to fake it? Like, how do you?
You fake it until you make it, right? Like I faked it enough to the point where it came naturally.
Yeah, so just watch a bunch of James Bond movies and like repeat the
Nah,
act.
dude, you just imitate the person speaking to you.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's very interesting. But yeah, that's what I love about this country regarding like immigration here. Not everything happening today, but like with the melting pot, like that's why this country's so great. It's just so
Well, wait, well, hold up. Saying America is a melting pot is can be considered to be a microaggression for a lot of people.
why?
This is from what I've seen. I don't really consider it to be a microaggression, but from the Instagram posts that I've seen, people have said that you are kind of getting rid of people's identity when you say it's a melting pot, right? You are not acknowledging the fact that people have distinct identities, but rather they fit this pot of Americanness rather than uh, um, what's the analogy they use now? They say like a salad or something. I don't know, dude. But melting pot
Uh,
can be considered microaggression.
Interesting. I did not. If anyone's offended by that, my bad. I did not mean it that way. But
Yeah, I
Shoumik,
mean, I
we're approaching the end of the convo because I know it cuts me off in an hour. Any other final words you'd like to say, my man?
dude, this was good. I enjoyed talking to you. A lot of the things we talked about, I wish we could dive in deeper because there's a lot to discuss. But having conversations like this is important. But a lot of us, me as well, I don't feel like I know enough about these topics. And any opinion that you have, it just seems not well researched, well founded. Regardless, I think it's important to have conversations like these and express your thoughts.
100%, my dude. This is why I do this shit. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure. And any of the stuff we didn't get deep on, I'll bring you back on. And I would love to hash things out more.
Hell yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Shoumik. Have a great night.
Thanks a lot, dude. Catch you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, y'all, that was episode 12. I think it was a fascinating conversation with Shoumik. Thank you so much for coming on to him. He was a great guest. We talked about a myriad of things. And as always, I'll have this episode out on Spotify, YouTube, all the platforms by tomorrow. And I'll also post the previous one with my little baby cousin. If you haven't seen that already, it was pretty fascinating. But as always, let me know if you have any other feedback for me. If you want to discuss anything regarding my views I said on this, I would love to hash things out. Thank you all, and have a great night.